Welcome to another episode of the Breakneck Podcast. I'm Matt Pashensky. I'm here with Ian Sweeney, and we're talking about major changes to the world of product development, entrepreneurship that are being caused by AI at a breakneck pace. This week, we want to look at how interfaces are radically changing. And I think everybody's just a year behind on this right now, at least a year. But Ian, take us through. Why are interfaces changing? Like user interface, like how the user accesses your product, thinks about it.
Yeah. So first of all, welcome to episode 41 of the Breakneck podcast, which is quite the milestone. And it's we're sort of getting into reflective mode a little bit as well, I think, right? Getting to the back end of the year.
Yeah, we're starting to think.
Yeah.
We started in like January. When was our first?
No, it was I think it was a little bit later than that, was it?
Maybe February, yeah. We started talking about it in January.
Yeah,
and
we
the
did.
big thing that was happening in December and January is it was just becoming apparent how much agentic AI, and that's an AI that isn't necessarily just waiting for you to log into a chat bot and talk to it, but one that's going to go out and be constantly assessing the world on your behalf and maybe take action on your behalf with other data systems, with other people. Maybe it's going to spend money on your behalf. Can we just do one little reflection?
Go for it.
You were sending me the email about the end of year. Maybe that's another episode. One of the things that I said, agents will have really met their kind of like hype in this year. If people have budgets for agents, and it says, give the agent $1,000 and just let it run, right? Because if the agent's doing the work of a human being, it should be no problem to give $1,000 to an agent or a few $100s to an agent at minimum. And I've never done that, but I know a lot more people are using agents and have that big variable spend with tools like Cursor. We're still in our credit mode. We haven't burned through all our credits yet. They gave you so many credits, so we aren't really thinking about the budget, which I guess is the point. But if you look at the revenue growth for Cursor, I think that's probably the first green shoot of agents just getting whatever budgets they need to go make the company more valuable. Mixed bag in terms of I'm not, giving it money to go book me a vacation. Here's $5,000, go nuts. I'd love to take a $5,000 vacation, but at least in computing and in software development, I think we are starting to see that.
Yeah. So back to UI. This is a real question. This is not a hypothetical at this point. We're beginning, as you said, to let various different forms of AI agents run free to do certain things. So we are interacting with computers in a very different way. I mentioned the reflection as well, because we started out the year with some hypotheses and now we have some data and some understanding, some collective understanding to start answering some of these questions. So let's get back to UI. It needs to change because the way we're interacting with computers is changing. And let's talk about sort of a basic framework here as to what has changed, and then we could talk about sort of the interaction. So we're trading different and more types of information with computers, specifically with AI, right? It can hear, it can see, it can understand language. So the pipe just got way bigger than it used to be. And then the way we communicate is different in the sense that it's becoming more symmetrical. So think about the web. Think about a Google search. What is X? What is Y? And we get a whole page of crap back, right? Very small piece of information. I don't want to say prompt, but a very small piece of information. The computer gives us a lot of information back. We are now having much more symmetrical types of conversations where we literally have a voice conversation and say, look, just bear with me for a second. I'm going to explain something. I hope you'll be able to answer this for me. And you splurge a lot of information. The AI understands it, interprets it, and gives you back an equal amount of information, let's say. So we're beginning to see something closer to symmetry in terms of how we interact. And then the last thing we're seeing, typically we have simplex interactions with computers. Turn taking. I say something or I type something in, it types something back. So all our UI is really designed with those types of communications and for these types of information. So if you're an entrepreneur, if you're in fact anybody building any type of a product and a business presumably around that product, all of this stuff is changing. And so the tools that you have in terms of user interactions are now woefully out of date. What is the answer that we've been provided with? It's the chatbot. What is the chatbot? The chatbot is essentially command line. So we've managed to go back, is it 20 years, 20, 30
50
years?
years.
Is it? When was it? So
I
the
the the
graphical
the
user
the
interface,
genesis of the command line, I think, the old MS-DOS days, but not before Windows, but just DOS. I remember when I was a kid, logging in the command line to get QBasic and then playing the gorillas throwing the monkey. Have you ever played the game where the gorillas throw the exploding bananas back and forth at each other?
I don't think I have. Was
I
that
don't know
an
if you
Apple game?
it's
No?
probably why I became a physicist, but you basically calculate the angle and the strength, and so you give a vector, and then the gorilla throws the banana. But it was all in the most terrible little. You had to like log in via command line.
10-year-old maths calculating, vectors.
That was
There you go.
one of my favorite games. And then the follow up to that QBasic game, we're gonna just go off. It was this game called Worms Armageddon, and that came out. I first played it when I was in college, and I was a physicist. And that game was great too because you throw a grenade and then bounce it off, and then it would come down and blow them up, and then it was worms, and so the worms would like fly and hit another grenade. And so it was like this multi-bank shot calculation. It was all about vectors.
There you go.
It's just the best.
Graphic. But that was my point. Like we've sort of eliminated graphical user interface,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which is, I think that was Apple. Was it the Apple II was the first one? Anyway, we all know a long, long time ago. So the good news is we got all this new shit that's flying around that's useful and valuable to us. But we're right now, actually, 6 months ago, 9 months ago, we were stuck back a command line chatbot. And then more recently, we've begun to see there isn't good language for this kind of tiled UI where you've got a chatbot and maybe you've got a
Well, let me show my screen because you sent me this link earlier in the week, and I'm okay. So this is Google's presentation on the new Gemini search. So this is their search page, but with their Gemini 3 integrated. Now Gemini 3 is probably like the greatest AI ever released. I mean, every 3-4 months that's the case. But what it's going to do, this is the three body problem, which is a physics problem related to stable gravitational orbits. And famously, there isn't a general stability for three body problems. There's only specific modes. And so it's going to calculate three body problem dynamics and then display them on screen. So this is a very different way of Google interacting with users compared to just directing them to a website that might have a little information about the three body problem. And so it'll be able to do like your taxes directly in the search screen, and you can ask it to do complex stuff. It's another way for Google to bring AI to the surface a lot faster, but then also just really cool stuff like animations and interactions. And you can imagine them, it showed them having kind of calculators, very different than the point and click 10 blue links that they used to have.
Yeah, and I think it's giving us a glimpse at the future. I want to add another kind of consideration in here. Super powerful, really interesting. It's really about making me more efficient as an individual, or maybe in my job. It's not a business type of a solution, and most of the time here on the podcast, we're really considering those types of things. So, I think it's cool and it's interesting, but I'm going to give you a little bit of a prediction as to where we're going to go with this stuff, specifically around business. So that was maybe an example of your chat plus some other dynamic type of a tile that is relevant for the thing you're doing. Interesting, fine, but in businesses, we're all about workflows. We're all about getting some deliverable, some type of outcome. And I think I would call this kind of the phase 2 type of a solution. And I haven't seen Pact lately, but the last time I saw it, it kind of reminded me of this. The other place to see it is in Riverside, in our editing platform, the podcast, where chat isn't the primary form of harnessing the AI. The AI is doing a bunch of work in the background. So for those not familiar, let's use the example of editing our podcast, right? So Riverside, we love it. We get to record, a bit like Zoom. It takes care of all the recording. It sucks up the video and the audio, and it just does something magical for us. It does a first draft of the episode. Now, if we were to do that on a typical editing platform, we'd have to drop in the different videos. We need to align them, synchronize it all, and then start doing some type of an edit. But the real magic of the Riverside UI is that the first thing it does is does its best attempt at getting to the business outcome we want, which is a finalized podcast. And then rather than having us do sliders and slice pieces of video and audio, it gives us the simplest UI possible for editing, which is actually to look at the transcription and say, oh, Matt said a bad word here. Let me just delete that. And I just highlight that piece of
You've been
text.
balderdizing my
I don't know what that means, but yes, I have been editing your content. But the point is, there is a UI that is not chat based at all, right? It's a fundamentally new UI that fits the need that we have for that type of a workflow. So, does that resonate, Matt? And maybe can you speak to your experience in Pact in terms of how you guys are moving
my
or
experience
changing
with
UI?
product over the years is that it's this constant, the user has more requirements than you have the capability, not to build necessarily, but to put into a coherent product, right? Like and that's why so many of the SaaS products, you get that little like left-hand strip, and then the left-hand strip has like 1,000 options. And then you can tell two different groups work on it because they have the left-hand strip, the top strip, and then they have the hamburger menu, and then the hamburger menu has a bunch of options, and then there's advanced settings in the hamburger menu, and then you click on advanced settings, and then it brings you to a whole new page itself with a whole bunch of options, right? And so it's like, that's not what I would call a coherent product. That's how Slack looks. There was a while where that's what the internet browser looked like. You remember Internet Explorer 6 had those taskbars? Excel, same problem. So it's like, it's the general force of, especially of a successful product, that people are going to have requirements, and there's only so many things you can stuff into somewhere where you have to click buttons. AI just, it's not like you have to think. In my experience now, it's not like you have to think to yourself, how can I make AI make my product better? It's just constantly the question of like, how are we going to do that? Let's just have the AI do it. Okay, that's just AI. And I think that's where Google has succeeded as a product, is they have this little command line bar which accepts text, and it's trained us to type into it. And so rather than like Yahoo where you had to click and navigate, you could just type exactly what you want. And that ability to have an extraordinarily flexible, high bandwidth interaction capability. I mean, compared to clicking buttons, it's insane, right? Like, how many different permutations of letters can you put into a command line versus the number of buttons that can appear on screen? It's insane. And so the AI that's kind of always been behind Google, of its ability to take human language and turn it into the user interface, I think has always been Google's strength. And now you're building, your little SaaS product or your consumer product. You can do the same thing.
Yeah. You're beginning to see, I've seen it in two places, this notion of, what was it? It was in Ramble On.
Yeah, the Todoist CEO has been texting a lot of, or he's been tweeting a lot about that. That's the name of the Todoist. I love Todoist, by the way. I'm a giant Todoist fan. I'm a super guru on their app.
There you go.
Yeah, he's at a
But
brand.
that idea of, I don't need to remember where all the buttons are. I'm going to tell you what to do. Highlight this, bold that, add this, whatever. And that's stepping stone to something bigger, but it's an interesting stepping stone. It's like, if you think of all the buttons, there are tools available, in kind of AI parlance. There's all the tools available to me. Why do I need to remember where all the tools are? Why can't I just tell you which tools to use? That's kind of halfway there. But the real panacea is to interact with your piece of software just like you interact with a human, which is like, show me the charts. Yeah. Okay, move the second one to the third slide, please. And what's that on the fourth one? I don't understand that. Can you present that to me in a different way,
Yeah,
please?
and I would go even further. We talked about having really interesting input modes, but one of the input modes is not do this, but to give it advice in general. Or maybe say, hey, here's a role that you have. You should go check this big directory that I just downloaded on how to be an accountant. Go, tell me what I should be doing and flip it around, right? And so the explosion of expressiveness of the inputs and the quantity of input, you have like a 1 million token window is very common, which is like the length of like I put one of my favorite books into the and I had like a 1 million token window. I'm like, oh, I wonder if I can get the whole thing in, and it was like a tenth of the token window, right? So like several novels worth of input. That it starts to degrade the performance as you get up to the full token, full context window. But like that's a level of expressiveness that's I think beyond comprehension right now. And the levels of the ways that you can expose your product used to be so constrained by your tiny amount of space in your app or what their user could remember. And now it can do stuff like diagnose the voice of this person. If they are anxious, here's some things that you might attempt. Also, look up everything this person's ever said to us and take that into account as well. Go. And that's like a legitimate prompt for a enterprise application now.
The challenge is if you're developing a product like that is just so expansive now in terms of the things you need to be thinking about when you ask yourself the question, well, what might the user want to do? Right? It was almost easier now. It's like, well, they want to save the file. Okay, well, we'll make sure there's a button, file, drop down, save. Okay, great. What else? Right? It was a task, a step they wanted to achieve. We're now operating at maybe 2 levels higher than that, which is not like, do they want to create a document? It's like imagine they want to create a document to summarize the performance of their business this year. Okay, what questions might they actually ask? Like that is very, very different. So the ramble button that Todoist is talking about is actually doing super interesting, but it kind of blows your mind. Like as a human to try and imagine, okay, we don't need to know every single task and step. We just give the AI, hey, these are all the things you can do. And then you need to translate the question from the human into that. But you still need to have all the tools that are available and you still need to provide
And I
some
think
level of structure.
just looking forward to 2026, so much of what people do with AI is still the AI kind of presenting it to the human and the human doing the last however much is left, which is still a lot, which is read this, assess if it's accurate, and send it along. If you do a bad job of that, we call it slop. If you do a good job, we say you're very productive, but it's still a human in the loop. And generally in the critical path of this is just going to be like you talked about Riverside does a good initial pass, but it always has the expectation that you do it. And I think there's this rising tide with AI, which is at what point do you completely trust the AI? Like I made like a map yesterday. I didn't look if it was like deformed, right? Like if Baja California was in the right place and Maine was in the right place. I just assumed it would be basically. So if that's already the type of task that we would have 99.9%, like it just ship it. And then I think as there's going to be tools, companies, base LLM capabilities that we'll start to recognize. But I think that has to be something that we build on. It has to be like, I'm going to give this to the AI and it's just going to get it right 100% of the time. I think is going to be a big part of bringing
Well,
this.
I don't think it'll ever get it right because at the comparison I would make is between managing somebody earlier in their career versus more senior in their career. The conversations you have with those two people are fundamentally different. You're explaining to the junior person, no, like we structure it this way and you want to do it that way. When you get to, we've all been in that situation where you're managing somebody that's better than you, right? But you still have feedback for them. You're like, no, I want it positioned this way. Don't use that word because of this thing over here. I have a personal taste or judgment that I want to apply. So I still think when we're doing high value, asking AI to do high value stuff, there is always going to be that personalization, that taste that we want to apply to the output. But I think we're in a world where AI is that kind of is that junior person and gets it wrong, gets it right 80% of the time, 85% of the time, which is pretty good for a junior person. But a senior person, we love having senior people work for us because like, oh, it's so fucking easy. I don't have to do much. Like we have
That
quick 10-minute meeting and you're like, that's great. I
that's
wouldn't
it.
even have thought of that.
And I
Thank
think
you.
it's worth understanding where you can basically assume AI is gonna get something right. And, hallucination, understanding context, understanding intention. Um, but I don't think many of those things are currently blocked mostly by the LLM capability about just the reasoning capabilities. I think a lot of times it's most companies are not set up to give even their employees the right context. But that's me talking my book.
Well, I think there's so how quickly is this going to come on stream? What's the blocking factor? I think there's two blocking factors. Uh, Product managers, product people just haven't worked through this. There's a lot of thinking to be done. The designers haven't thought through. The other thing with UI is how many times have we launched a UI and the feedback from the users? We hate this thing. They hate it because of change. And then 90 days later, they can't even remember what it used to be like because they love the UI. So there's a learning curve and a willingness to do that learning. So that gates us a little bit. The only thing that I would say here is the demand is there.
Yeah, I think the demand's there. Google has very quickly moved to their AI generated overviews. So clearly, like people are interacting with in a way that Google people are very happy with. If you look at the adoption and usage of OpenAI, it's the fastest adopted technology ever. And of course, people complain. The two kind of complaints. Like people were complaining a whole bunch, and now we had Ricky on, and Ricky, has like publishers, but a lot of people act like they're a publisher. Like, oh, the AI is stopping these poor website owners. It's like you don't own a website. Like, stop. Worry about me. I want to get my answer as quickly as possible. If Google can make money somehow, or they think they can in the future, God bless them. I want it, and I think but there's still a lot of people, you could show any AI tool that I'm playing with, and I don't think I'm like the most locked in person. I have like a very demanding job and I have to do a podcast once a week. So it's like there's very little time for me to go and play to the level I want. But most people don't even have the fraction of the stuff that we're talking about on this show still. And so it's the fastest growing technology of all time. There's a huge amount for it to be implemented. Everything still has to change still. I don't think we're even like really adopted it very much. This sounds like a really um credulous podcast, like these AI hype guys. Like AI has done so much in the last week. Here's a top 10 thing, but I consider myself a cynic, and here I am just being like, oh, this shit's amazing. This is cool. Like this week was great. Why don't we talk about what we saw this week? I think we could go on this topic forever, but let's talk about what we saw this week. What was your
Yeah.
number one?
I think we're going to do an end of year episode and we'll talk more about our predictions. But one of the ones that I'm really interested in is the manifestation of AI in the physical world,
Mhm.
kind of adding the arms and legs to AI. And mechanical engineering backgrounds are always kind of an interest in that stuff. MIT is in the process of launching an agent that speeds up 3D design. So if you've ever anything on your desk in front of you was designed in CAD, unless the human physically made it. It's a very complex process, bunch of different considerations. Takes a long time to do. Think about all the components that go into. I love cars, right? Components that go into cars and have to fit together. Really, really challenging thing. They've come up with an agent which they believe is going to speed up that process. So we talk about velocity in software. There's potential to inject velocity in hardware. So imagine if we can build things, I'm not going to put any numbers on it, a meaningful percentage quicker to get you physical products into your
One
hand.
of my
So,
favorite OG 1990s software technology, and I've worked with a lot of people who came from there, and a lot of the sales greats in the Silicon Valley came from Parametric Technology Corporation. That was essentially what they did back in the day. I interviewed Mark Cranny, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago, and got his stories from the day at Parametric Technology. But the idea that they could just change the dimensions and parametrically define a part was like a huge breakthrough in the 90s. And so it's like, okay, well, let's do that with AI. It makes a lot of sense. It was a huge success.
yeah. Well, think it's really great example. Instead of saying, "Hey, this size is gonna be double what it is," and you scale everything up kind of parametrically, now what you're saying is, "Hey, I've got this much space for a component. It needs to do X and Y. Can I have it, please?"
Yeah. Or I'm making it twice as long, given what you know about how this product is used. What's the shear modulus of this? I'm not a mechanical engineer, so I don't remember. I don't know how
Yeah,
these
yeah.
terms work, but like, do we make it thicker? Do we have to, engineer it? Should we keep our weight reduction down and add a hollow part in between to maintain the stiffness?
Here's
Those are
here's the
just
cost.
things that you can ask over and over again with an agent, and then it pops it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, and actually, now that you bring it up, I had a super interesting conversation last week with a buddy of mine who, CTO at a business that, well, I won't divulge what they do, but they are sitting on all of this historic data from design and manufacture, and they do some really interesting stuff around it. And they have spun up this other thing, which is, it's all great that you can kind of tell a system to do this, but actually, a lot of the information you need is empirical as
Hmm.
well.
Hmm.
And they have that empirical data. So it's kind of that data set to draw the comparison, train the LLM on. But anyway, 26, 27. I think we're gonna see some super interesting stuff in this space. Hardware is a little bit behind on the software naturally because it's
Okay.
more complex.
Designing
So there's my
robots
thing for the week.
and parts, whatever. My big thing this week is Nano Banana Pro is very close to being able to make slides, like really nice slides, uh, in one shot. And
That's the bit of Gemini that gets you most excited.
oh my God, can you imagine a year from now just chatting with a thing and it's going to make a beautifully designed, perfect slide deck in Google Slides? And you just like, no, I want to change that number, change that up. How do you think that image should look? Change it. Like, we're so close to this. I will spend $1,000 a month on credits for slide generation. I have to make so many sales slides and investor pitches and all of these things. Oh my God. Like, I don't think people are ready for how much of business is taking notes in meetings and creating slide decks. And once both of those things are automated, we are on the cusp of the greatest revolution in the human spirit since language was invented on the savannas of Africa.
Just at there we go. Well, that's I'm not sure I agree with the magnitude of that claim, but I'm certainly, excited that slides
I
might be a
never
little
read
bit
the book
easier to
about the
put together.
singularity, but I'm pretty sure when I don't have to make slides anymore is my personal singularity. There'll be the pre and post, and that's how we'll define like, hey, slide decks are no longer something you have to build by hand. I've been waiting for this, and I go try Nano Banana, ask it to make you an infographic or a slide or whatever. We're so close.
Okay. Well, we've reached the singularity, which means that we probably need to end this episode. All right, let's land it there. Thanks, Matt.